Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome on behalf of the Guild of Analytical Psychologists and UCS to the 8th Vera von der Heydt lecture, Michael Brearley's Freeing Up Thinking, Sport, Psychoanalysis and Everyday Life. In one of our conversations in the lead up to this lecture, Mike spoke about the question C.L.R. James asks in his book, Beyond the Boundary. James asks, what do they know of cricket who only cricket know? This struck a chord with me, and it's not because I'm an expert cricketer. I was thinking about the von der Heydt lecture series and concluded that their real purpose is indeed to address this very same question, albeit in another context. What do they know of psychoanalysis who only psychoanalysis know? Tonight is about exploring connections between psychoanalysis, sport, and everyday life to bring greater consciousness to the nature of psyche itself. We're here to challenge and to inspire thinking and experience, both within and beyond boundaries. Any of you familiar with Mike, his psychoanalytic work, his books and commentary, and his extraordinary accomplishments in cricket, know well that he is a magician in this respect. Touched by his thinking, it's inevitable that one's own becomes expansive. Before you even know it yourself, there arrives a new vista. Mike qualified as a psychoanalyst from the Institute of Psychoanalysis in 1985 after a stellar cricket career, captaining Middlesex for 12 years and England in 31 tests. Before training as an analyst, Mike lectured in philosophy at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne. And what some of you may not know is that he had a brief teaching stint here, at the junior branch of UCS, where no doubt he learnt the resilience and patience that would serve him well for his England captaincy. He continues to work as a psychoanalyst and a lecturer on leadership and motivation. He is the author of the best-selling The Art of Captaincy, On Form, and just last week his new book, On Cricket, was published. Like cricket, psychoanalysis is an art form. Both require an inquisitive mind, an openness, curiosity, and intuition, as well as sensitivity to image and to word. How remarkable to embody these qualities and have the presence of mind to apply them, witnessed by thousands on the sports field, and to then have the humility to apply them with equal measure in the quiet space of the consulting room. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and a great honour to hand over to Mike Brearley.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kathy. I think if you have any complaints about this talk, you can address them to Kathy because she's been a sort of editor and coach and very, very helpful discussions that have gone into it. I've got some sort of headings for different sections. And the first section is called I Am Me. Can you hear a word? Is it what? It is a bit fudgy, but I don't know what to do about that. Is that better? Is that better? The fall off the back. I'll try being slightly further away. If you can't hear, please wave. When I was about 14, I was walking along a corridor in the semi-basement of the City of London School. A corridor that led to a room where we'd 4 years before been taught French pronunciation by Nicky Lemonsoir Field. And what I now picture in my mind of this moment is seeing through the windows, which were high up because it was semi-basement, the other buildings on the opposite side of the street, and the bright sky above the Thames and on the other side of the Thames. I think it was the middle of the day, but my memory is of slanting light, so it must have been winter, and it was around lunchtime. And 60 years on, I remember this sudden epiphany. I had the thought, I am me. I was for the first time with that degree of articulation, aware of my identity as a separate self. I suppose I meant something like this. I felt a conviction of myself as a centre of experience and a source of action. I am me. Is it sounding any better, or is it all right? Okay. 40 years later, I was talking to a senior psychoanalytic colleague about being a late developer, me, not him. And I'd been late into puberty, and in many other respects it had taken me a long time to grow into things, including professional cricket. And what I was now referring to was being slow to achieve a psychoanalytic identity. And the colleague, whose name is John Steiner, said to me, "You need to captain yourself." And this reminded me of a phrase in a poem called Invictus by William Ernest Henley. It's a very Victorian poem. "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." Now, how are these two experiences, or these two ideas of being me and captaining my soul, related? I am me, a centre of experience and a source of action, I suggest. The latter phrase, a source of action, seems at first sight to chime better with captain of my soul, because I realised that I am and was an agent in the world. I initiate things, I set things in motion. I have the freedom and power of agency in this thought about I am me. We think of captaincy in cricket, say, as involving agency. The captain points. He tells people what to do, where to stand in the field. He changes the bowling. Leadership in all fields centrally involves telling and agency, which also entail responsibility, on the basis that our agency makes things happen, causes outcomes. To be captain of my soul, then, means perhaps, in the first place, being able to lead my whole self, my soul, in directions of my choosing. It seems to imply that my soul is, or could be, subject to me, not to extraneous factors, not to non-rational elements within myself. I don't, if I'm captain of my soul, it seems, allow myself to be manipulated into acting in ways that are contrary to my principles and aims. I'm master of my fate. The next bit is called bloody but unbowed. However, of course, no one believes that can be true in every way. We get diseases, accidents happen we can't control or prevent. We may, of course, invite danger, but we can't always preclude it. Nevertheless, we do believe, with caveats, that some people more than others are indeed captains of their soul. They have integrity, we say. They act according to their own wills. They don't readily allow themselves to be swayed this way or that. Whether principled or willful, they decide their own courses of action. The narrator of that poem claims to be ready to face the bludgeonings of chance with head bloody but unbowed. And the poem ends with his defiance of religious dogma or prohibitions. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. We can't avert our fate always, then, but we can face it with blooded head unbowed. This means it's not just agency that's involved in being captain of the soul, but also resilience, courage, endurance, resolve. I said just now that my revelation in the school corridor was of myself as an ongoing centre of experience, and the poem suggests we can own our experience and not deny or flatten it. We have the potential to realise when a powerful person or organisation or propagator of dogmas which is confronting me with punishments if I don't conform, is trying to control me or bludgeon me out of my beliefs, out of my values, out of my desires. If I'm capable of being a centre of experience, I recognise this more fully, and I refuse to submit or become a doormat. So, next heading is, leaders do more than tell. Brief reflection informs us that captaincy and leadership call for more than telling. As we saw with the England football team under Gareth Southgate during the 2018 European Cup, it involves too support for the players, both individually and as a collective or team. When, years earlier, he managed England under-21s, he made sure that he and other coaches regularly visited their players in their clubs, keeping in contact, so that these promising young footballers knew that he and others were aware of what was going on in their lives, even perhaps they might think concerned about them. What you know about them gives you clues about which way you might best go to help them improve, Southgate said. Whatever the outcome of the match or tournament, he thinks in terms of improvement, of development. He knows that one may learn more from failure than from success. He himself had to learn, of course, from his own missed penalty years ago that became notorious. He acknowledges that every defeat hurts, but he also said it should make you question yourself. He encourages his current players to own the process. With regard, for example, to penalties and England's poor performance in penalty shootouts over many years, his England side had to learn and take to heart the idea that we make our own history. We're not bound to repeat the past. When England went out of the European Cup this summer, Southgate also commiserated warmly with each player. I admire his stance towards his players. One word for it is love. Tough love, no doubt, which means being able to speak directly about shortcomings or failings, to induce the individuals and the team as a whole to face up to them and learn from them. Criticisms are made not so much in a punitive spirit as in a spirit of continual openness to improvement. For manager and for players, such an attitude requires humility, the willingness to learn, as well as a proper pride. Right, the next section is called Let Him Finish. In my view, leadership also, as well as all the things that Southgate says, and he says a lot more than I've just said he says, for a willingness to learn from the team members, to consult them. Leaders must be good listeners as well as good talkers or tellers. In 1968, I was shortlisted for that position of lecturer in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne, which Cathy mentioned. And there was a formal interview with the Professor of Philosophy, who was called Carl Britton, and a couple of other academics, including the Professor of Law. It was quite intimidating. Early in the interview, the Professor of Law asked me a complicated question about hearsay evidence in the courts. The question went something like this. In law, he said, witnesses may not give evidence that relies on hearsay, that is, on what someone else said about a situation, except in certain exceptional circumstances. For example, he said, one may use someone's comments as evidence of his or her state of mind. Are there, the professor asked me, philosophical grounds for this legal exception? What do you think? Well, nervously and tentatively, I began to speak. Quite quickly, this professor interrupted me, beginning to tell me what he thought the right answer was. Equally quickly, Carl Britton, professor of philosophy, cut across him. "Let him finish," he said curtly. I was emboldened by the idea that at least one person in the room believed I had something to finish. and I went on to give a more or less confident answer. When someone speaks about his own mind, I said, his own intentions or feelings, he's not infallible, but words are in a more direct way evidential for his state of mind than his words would be for anything about the shared external world. So yes, there are philosophical grounds for the legal distinction. I've always believed that without this intervention, and indeed faith, from Carl Britton, I would have lost confidence, probably got into a minor panic, and wouldn't have got the job. And if that had been the case, many things would then have been different in my life. Carl thought I had something to say, and then made sure I was given a fuller chance to say it. The story had a spontaneous and unexpected sequel, which happened kind of automatically without my thinking about it, but then I realised afterwards what had happened. 9 years later, in 1976-7, I was vice-captain for the England cricket team on the tour of India, Sri Lanka and Australia. In Australia, we played the centenary test, a remarkable match in which Dennis Lillee took 11 wickets, Derek Randall scored 174 in our second innings, and Australia eventually won by precisely the same margin, 45 runs, as had been the result in the match 100 years before. Wouldn't you all have something to say about that? Synchronicity or something. But I don't think any of us had known this fact before the match or during the match, and there it was. But the point of telling you that is that on the evening before the match, we had a team meeting as usual. And in the course of the meeting, Derek Randall, who was a junior member of the side, who was quirky, funny and engaging, but also quite shy, doing something like talking in public, started to say something in the general discussion. I can't remember what it was. But Tony Gregg, who was captain, probably more, had all the anxiety on his shoulders of the match the next day, rather quickly moved on, not giving him space. And I found myself saying, in Britton's words, "Let him finish." Randall made his point, and I still wonder whether that intervention made a difference to his confidence, just as Britton's had done to mine nearly 10 years before. The professor of philosophy, unlike his colleague from law, was willing to wait and listen, and enabled me to listen to myself and find in myself appropriate resources. This is slightly an aside, but it's a little vignette from a patient whose therapy I supervised recently, who would controllingly interrupt her therapist, not letting the therapist make his point. Like the professor of law, she, the patient, wouldn't allow him to finish. And this quality came across as compulsive, desperate, and destructive. She was terrified of what she might be being asked to consider. And she didn't know because she didn't hear, but she thought it was going to be too difficult to bear, or too troublesome, or too critical, or whatever it was she had the fancy. She couldn't accommodate any hint, too, that she might be vulnerable, in need of help, damaged. As time went on, and as a result of interpretations along these lines by the therapist, the patient was able to notice how she interrupted not only the therapist, but also herself. A violent interrupting was an attack on him and on her own mind and her capacity to think. The next section is called Flattening Hierarchies. One never knows in a team or organisation or group where the next good idea will come from. It may be from the top or the bottom of the hierarchy. It may come from inside the core group or outside it. What's more, as might have been the case of me with Randall, encouraging a junior member of a hierarchy to speak, offering them space and encouragement, makes a difference to how they develop, and as was the case with me and Carl Britton. Mike Gattin and Simon Hughes were two fine cricketers who made their debuts for Middlesex towards the end of my time as captain, so I was getting on for 40, and they were in one case about 17 or 18, and in the other case 20. Apparently, and I didn't remember this, and they both told me separately many years later, not that long ago in fact. Apparently I went up to them in the field in their first or second match and asked their opinion as to what we should do next, who should bowl, what our plan might be. Both were surprised, lost for words, yet also flattered. They were a bit flabbergasted too. Mike Gattin tells me that I said something like, at the end of a rather unproductive conversation, brief conversation, I said something like, next time I hope to have some ideas from you, thus putting him on his mettle, but also encouraging him to think and speak. And Simon Hughes remembers me not only asking the question, but following his advice, as a result of which things went from bad to worse. These stories reflect what was a conscious aim of mine, to have a team full of people who were thinking about strategy and tactics, about the whole team. I wanted everyone to be open to the game in ways that went beyond the narrow limits of their individual roles and personal successes or failures. Such an atmosphere means that conflicts within the team are not swept under the carpet. Sometimes the insights or interventions are painful or troubling to the person in charge or to the senior people. They may threaten narcissism. But leaders need to take critical comments seriously, recognising the degree of truth in them. I mean, sometimes there's not much truth in them, but sometimes there's a great deal. Being willing to wrestle with the discomfort. At times the views may be distorted. They may be more a reflection of the idiosyncrasies of the individual who voices them. But it's important to hear these views too. You know where the person is, you know where the opposition or some of it is coming from. Now, this atmosphere of participation, freedom and argument is clearly not always easy, as in a family. Opposition and dissatisfaction would be more out in the open, but for that same reason can be recognised and therefore potentially thought about and sometimes modified. And I think that's a relatively democratic atmosphere, and that it helps create a bubbly and committed team. It reinforces, or it tends to, unless the oppositions are too intractable and too violent, it reinforces team spirit or morale. It's important for success. As I said, good ideas are not the prerogative of any particular subgroup or individuals. We need hierarchies for efficiency and differentiation of role, but usually, in my opinion, in my experience, hierarchies work better when they're not too steep. I heard somebody say recently about academic courses as contrasted with apprenticeships. We British have a genius for turning difference into hierarchy. Next heading is called Aristotle. You'll be surprised to hear him arriving in this. In different parts of the self, speaking with like voices, which is a phrase of his. So, captaincy involves listening, consulting, respecting, being open to members of the team. How does this apply, you might be wondering, to being captain of one's soul. In the arena of the mind or soul of an individual, where does consulting come in? I suggest that there are indeed parts of the self that one needs to consult and listen to, and sometimes, no doubt, tell. There's an American psychoanalyst called Jonathan Lear, who was previously a classical scholar, so he refers back very helpfully not only to Freud and other people, but also to Plato and Aristotle. So he has touchstones with them. And he's written about how Aristotle helps us to understand this situation. Aristotle spoke about a rational part of the soul or self and a non-rational part. This non-rational part, he said, in a way participates in reason. I think I'll try and be explaining that a bit better as I go on. It can, in effect, listen to and speak to the reasoning or reasonable part of the self. In his book on ethics, he notes how the virtuous and happy person is at ease with himself. The etymology of the Greek word for happiness, which is eudaimonia, is being well in regard to one's inner spirits. Daimonia means demons, but also spirits, in friendly and honest communication with them. Aristotle describes this as what he calls homophonia, which means speaking with like voices. It's as if the different parts of the self can speak with like voices with each other, both the rational, thoughtful, conscious, secondary process part of the self, and the more emotional, more erratic, more volatile parts of the self. One might think of this speaking with like voices as a sort of harmony, and perhaps it is. But Lear says it's not the sort of clanging, simple harmony of a marching band. It's more like something jazzy, syncopated, surprising. Again, if you think of a family arguing about something, a lively family around the breakfast table arguing about something, somebody comes in with something that's left field, and somebody else comes in with an argument with that, and somebody else pacifies, and somebody else provokes. But if it's going well, it can be very productive. And I think Aristotle would also be suggesting that where there is disharmony or conflict or disagreement, this can be tolerated and even at times resolved. And sometimes one just has to set it to one side and get on with things and put that away for the time being. For Aristotle, the happy and the virtuous man has grown to live well naturally, just as a good footballer or cricketer has grown to play the game so that it feels natural to him or her to do these things in a skillful, disciplined and spontaneous way. He or she has developed good habits based on good mentors, good teachers, discipline and practice, such that many of the decisions of life occur without anguish. Not all, but many. Such a person is rather like a chef that Confucius talked about, who chops meat and vegetables with quick and automatic confidence. So at home is he with his implements. So these inner voices need to respect one another and be allowed their space. I, one might say, in the sentence I and me, I need to listen to me or the various aspects of me, and me may also be able to listen to I. My first analyst, called Pearl King, used to speak of giving house room to thoughts, to feelings and to fantasies, rather than shutting the door on them. We may learn to notice the ways we find ourselves being pulled this way or that. We may even become more open to and familiar with previously unconscious thoughts and assumptions. Just as in social and intimate life with others, we may notice how we become false or insincere with some people more than with others, perhaps because we're over-eager to please some people, or touchy and irritable, or guarded and tongue-tied. And in fact, we become less than ourselves, as we sometimes put it. And this noticing may not, but it may lead to more honest ways of relating. It's a truism that with everyone we have a unique relationship, each with its own patterns and priorities. But with some people more than with others, we feel more ourselves, fuller, more open, more creative. We're more able to feel I am me, and we begin to have a glimmering of what that might amount to. So, summing up so far, captains of teams need to be willing to tell people what to do, but also to listen and pay attention to what comes from anyone or anywhere in the team. For this to be possible, hierarchies mustn't be too steep, individuals must feel free to comment, make their voices heard, and often need to be encouraged to do this. These voices need to be empowered. What I'm also saying is that there's a parallel requirement within the self to listen and be in internal dialogue. Whilst a team is a kind of individual with persisting qualities and traditions, even when players change, they retire, new people come in. And people say at the Berlin, I think it's the Berlin Orchestra, I can't remember what it's called, that they always have the same kind of, they're recognisable, like an individual is recognisable, despite the fact that people are talking about they're playing over a period of 60 years, let's say. But the reverse is true too. An individual is also a team. As personalities, as persons, we're more like teams than we usually think. We have inner figures with whom we are or become identified. And here's a little example of that and how someone managed to disidentify. A man whose mother constantly hit him when he was a child found himself about to strike his 3-year-old daughter, angrily and in frustration. Suddenly, I think he'd almost lifted her up to hit her. He realised what he was doing. As he put it, he had in that instant become his mother, but the lights had come on. He was appalled. He didn't hit her. He put her down. He went away into another room and sat and cried for 20 minutes. After this experience, he never hit any of his 3 children. He knew it was a near thing. Prior to being in dialogue with this inner version of his mother and a different version of himself, he had for a moment become her. When the lights came on, he became homophonic, Aristotle's term for like voices, in touch with this other self, the other self that was resolved not to be like his mother, not to reenact his own trauma with his own children. He'd listened to himself. He didn't need to perpetuate the pattern. The same patient became at times depressed, and his personality was such that he would quickly become frustrated by the stupidity of others, by the requirement to observe forms of behaviour or dress codes that seemed to him pointless, even damaging to the work task. He would become quickly angry, blunt, disparaging. He could also show his scorn for these authority figures, and it got him into a lot of trouble. At times, however, he would then become helpless, or he'd feel completely helpless, perhaps also guilty of the violence of his own retaliatory thoughts and actions. And one example of that degree of retaliation came when he told me a story about driving his car one night, and a car came round the bend on the opposite side of the wrong side of the road, 2-lane road, one each way, and he couldn't avoid the accident. But what he did, he decided in that instant, he decided to home in on the man's lights, to hit him head on, in fury at this fact. I mean, I can understand the fury, but this was his reaction. Coming up against a brick wall in life, he would as it were, sometimes probably literally, punch it. But he also became depressed, and I think he became depressed. I think his predicament was that it became too reminiscent, these situations, of his early situation with his mother, where he could do nothing right, where he would be hit because, as she sometimes said, when he protested he'd done nothing wrong, he must have done something worthy of a smack around the head. In his adult life, he sometimes felt he was confronted by someone who responded to his querying or questioning with the equivalent of one of his mother's other mantras: "You have to do it because I say so." And I think he began to feel impotent, helpless, and depressed. And if this was aroused too far, he could get stuck in that state for periods of weeks or months at a time. Ultimately, I think he felt that if he couldn't elicit love or rationality from his mother or her current representative in his adult world, life was not worth living. At such moments, he couldn't be in dialogue with the internal figures. He was once again reduced to that early experience of helplessness, being without resources and feeling vaguely guilty existentially in the wrong. As Aristotle puts it, the good and creative person actively engages with the non-rational, emotional parts of the self. And another psychoanalytic colleague, who's called Vic Sedlak, writes about an experience of his own with a patient who threatened him with exposure and was furious with him for weeks on end for his alleged greediness. He charged him for a session at a sensitive time of this person's life. And Vic Sedlak writes, "In order to engage successfully with such a painful and entrenched experience, the analyst must have the capacity to consult with himself and to tolerate waiting in uncertainty." I would say that a central aim of psychoanalysis is the growth and integration of the self. It's a human tendency to restrict ourselves, to shut out parts of ourselves. D.H. Lawrence, a novelist, coruscatingly attacks Benjamin Franklin for envisaging the self too narrowly, too tamely. Lawrence writes, "The wholeness of a man is his soul, not merely that nice little comfortable bit which Benjamin Franklin marks out. The soul of man is a dark, vast forest with wild life in it. Think of Benjamin fencing it off." The enlargement of the self, by contrast, often frightens us. We may have to give house room to a punitive or murderous self, or a self at risk of being overwhelmed by the impulses or wishes of nightmares. Such fear is one source of the contemptuous term for a psychoanalyst, namely a shrink. In fact, I think psychoanalysts aim to do just the opposite. We aim to expand, enlarge, and integrate the self. The next section brings us from Aristotle, with the help of that man Jonathan Lear, to Freud in psychoanalysis, and it's called free association. I think we've begun to see that one dimension of the relationship between parts of the self and the harmony, dissonance, or incongruities between them is illuminated by the notion of the unconscious. Jonathan Lear brings to our attention how significant a change in Freud's psychology occurred when he put at the centre of the process of psychoanalysis what he called the fundamental rule. The fundamental rule that was the only rule he gave to his patients. Sometimes he gave it explicitly, sometimes I think not, was assumed or said in other ways, was to please say whatever comes to your mind. Don't inhibit or censor anything. And that the analyst's job was, or a fundamental part of it, Freud went on to say, is to notice when blocks in the thinking occur to this free association. If you notice this and help the patient to notice it, there may arise a more transparent relationship between the patient and his unconscious, and between the patient and the analyst, because the idea is that if you stop a process of free association when you're consciously trying to say what comes to mind, something's probably interfered, a thought has interfered which may not be articulable to you at that moment or later on, but it keeps stopping you going on in that process. And sometimes people are very inhibited in that sort of way. And in fact, we all actively, but unconsciously often, block certain experiences and certain thoughts, convinced that they can't be born, and we distort them into more palatable forms and shapes. And here's an example. It's Jonathan Lear's, but I've known people like this too, probably you have. It's the person who deals with disappointment by nursing grievances or becoming a victim. Such a person may even turn being disappointed into a sombre and perverse satisfaction, so that they're almost more pleased with being the victim than with getting what they want, or what they apparently want. Such a person has come to believe it's safer and more in his control, or hers, to be the victim of cruel fate, or of other people's rejections, and to risk trying to do anything to make things better. Even if in the everyday course of his life he achieves an overt aim, if he gets what he wants, taking satisfaction and pleasure in it carries a risk of further humiliating disappointment. And this person's solution is to run down his successes. You can imagine someone saying he got the job only because there was no one else. He's invited to a party because people feel sorry for him, not because they want him. A girl is interested in him only because of his money or his status. Some cricketers run themselves down. Internally, and sometimes with other people. I'm not good enough to be playing at this level. I've too many limitations. If I score runs, it's only because their best scorer isn't playing, or he's been off the field. I've only scored with my favourite shots. I haven't played all around the room. I played in this too many times. I was dropped. I didn't really deserve to make that score. I'm thinking of someone who persistently undermines what he's done in that sort of way. And clearly, that sort of talking down is not just a theoretical or academic matter. Such a person, as I just said, undermines his own potential, his moment-to-moment capacity. He grips the bat tighter, he frowns, he scores fewer runs, he doesn't live up to his potential. His self-assessment becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, how are we doing for time? I don't want to keep you too long, I won't have time for discussion. But I've got something I think I do want to show you, and it's coming up on here now. And it's a bit of, not Jonathan Lear, but King Lear by Shakespeare. And it's kind of wonderful. It's only 5 lines, but it's rather dense. It's there too, I think. Yeah. Can everyone see it one way or the other? Yeah? Now, just to give you the setting of this scene, King Lear has become deranged, or as in the first line, the king is mad. He's rejected his loving daughter Cordelia, and has then himself been rejected by his unkind daughters Goneril and Regan, whom he foolishly trusted, but also imposed on in a scandalously difficult way, with his 100 knights whom he expected to be put up by them every time he felt like it. In the parallel subplot, the Duke of Gloucester, who's speaking here, or speaking to himself, more like, has naively trusted his illegitimate son, Edmund, who twisted Gloucester's mind against the loving and legitimate son, Edgar. In the meantime, in the plot, Gloucester, the man whose thoughts these are, has been cruelly blinded by Regan, one of Lear's daughters and her husband, and he comes across the man of King Lear near Dover. He's appalled by what he encounters and reflects, the king is mad, how stiff is my vile sense that I stand up and have ingenious feeling of my huge sorrows. Better I were distract, so should my thoughts be severed from my griefs, and woes by strong imaginations lose the knowledge of themselves. Now, I'm going to go through this speech a bit because it's not easy to take in at first hearing or sight. But I think it's a brilliant speech, and it captures quite a bit of what psychoanalysis claims, in particular in referring to the wrong imaginations that sever us from experiencing loss and painful emotions like guilt. These wrong imaginations cover over the gaps in feeling, the breaking off from awareness of suffering. Gloucester wonders to himself if it might be better to be distract, that is, mad, but also distracted from the reality of his actual states of mind, from his emotions and actions. And Gloucester's own sanity, his sense, how stiff is my vile sense, his sanity is vile in its ingenious, that's to say, torturous feeling, and in its knowledge of his own pain, his huge sorrows. I mean, he's been blinded, he's betrayed his good son, he's trusted his devious and corrupt son, and he's got everything wrong in his life. And now something similar has happened to Lear. He wonders if madness, like that of the king, would be preferable to his own sanity, his sense. Sanity is, he reflects, vile in its knowledge of his own pain, his huge sorrows. His standing up, being right, I mean, not he's blind, but he's sane, his vile sense is contrasted with the king's collapse. When a person distracts himself, as the king does, from such pain, his knowledge, his thoughts of his woes, is severed by wrong imaginations, that's to say, by self-deception. We cut ourselves off from intolerable pain, from our own woes, thus becoming distracted, whether neurotically or in delusionary ways. Lear's wrong imaginations include what we've seen in the preceding scenes, his holding court in the forest in the storm, when, as if he's still king, when in fact he's naked in the storm, he's abandoned, he's without government, courtiers, power, or the trappings of power. So he is, frankly, deluded in some ways. It's amazing how much Shakespeare packs into this short space. Alongside this, King Lear's breakdown is also a rupture of some of his own omnipotence, because he was a pretty tyrannical old king, not a very nice man, not a very fair monarch, as was shown by his narcissistic rejection of his loving daughter and his mistaken, his lack of judgment in preferring and giving his kingdom to his two older daughters. During the breakdown in the storm, in the forest, he can for the first time have empathy for the poor, for poor Tom, outcast and homeless in the storm. Now he's able to recognise, though without adequate reflection on himself, the hypocrisy of power. Hark, he says earlier in the play, in hearken thine ear, change places, and handy-dandy, which is the justice, the judge, and which the thief. Thou rascal beadle, hold thy bloody hand, why dost thou lash that whore? Strip thine own back, thou hotly lustest to use her in that kind for which thou whipp'st her. In other words, you want the whore just as much as the people you're punishing wanted her. Or you're punishing her just as much as others wanted her. Robes and furred grounds hide all. He sees the hypocrisy that those in power are prone to, without explicitly identifying it as having been central to himself and his own government. Now, I think I want to stop very soon. I've got a bit more that I could say. Perhaps I'll just say, ad-libbing, that what Lear says about Freud and Freud's idea about the crucial thing in analysis being to come to say what's on their own mind, is that, and to say it freely without censorship, is that if you do that, and if the analyst helps you to notice when you come across a block, so he shows you when something's interfered with the conscious line of thought, you can sometimes, and over time, come to sense it in yourself, so that you can almost in the moment of it being born, you can hear the interfering thought, or the way a thought interferes with a process of thinking that you don't want to acknowledge. So, and that, I think, became one of the most important things about Freud's account of psychoanalysis after that. Not that the unconscious is this sort of dark cellar of the mind, which it is, but that it also interferes with one's way of apparently rational thinking, and blocks one from doing things, and prevents emotions from coming through that you need to know about. For example, emotions of greed, or revenge, or jealousy, or envy, or any of or desire, or love, or even kindness, if you think that that's a soft version, soft emotion to have. So, this internal dialogue involves freeing up the thinking that goes on in the mind. And I think it happens in everyday life, between people and within oneself, but it happens more, as a matter of policy, or a matter of aim in psychoanalysis. Not all the time, but from time to time, when one of these things happen. And we all have these basic unconscious assumptions, ways of assuming the world must be, like that patient of Jonathan Lear's, who turns everything to disappointment, and almost prefers disappointment to satisfaction. We have that as a sort of guiding principle that interferes with our living and our freedom. I would say, I'll come back to the very end now, that I'll ask one question. How can the psychoanalyst create an atmosphere in which the patient's curiosity and openness to himself and others is likely to be enhanced in the ways I've just been talking about? How can the patient become more able to listen to him or herself, to be more the captain of her soul, especially when put under pressure by the challenges of life? And of course, that's a matter of the art of psychotherapy, as well as of the analyst's knowledge and learned skills. But first, the analyst must be perceptive enough. Even more important is his or her example to the patient of open-mindedness, curiosity, and ability to bear pressure. Indeed, sometimes patients test us, throwing at us challenges that may threaten our integrity or our presence of mind. And I think they do that to us as parents or grandparents or coaches or whatever else we do with other people. How they watch to see, how will we react to them? Can we bear hostility? Can we bear love? Can we live with our own emotions? Are we attuned to our own many voices? Can we recover quickly enough and well enough from disruptions to our regular ways of being? For patients to begin to notice moves of their own minds in the moment of their happening, or soon after, perhaps they have to have an intuition that the analyst too is capable, often through inner struggle, of something of this kind. But I would say, as I did just say, that it's of the essence of psychoanalysis that patients come to think more freely, and in particular to become more aware of giving house room to recognizing and sometimes conceptualizing inner processes, both newer ones and ones that become fixed and automatic, and to work through new instances of such tendencies. There's a psychoanalyst called Wilfred Bion who once said his aim was to introduce the patient to that person with whom they have most dealings in the course of their lives, namely themselves. And freeing up thought is a matter of transparency towards and within our own selves or souls. Emotion and the kind of thinking involved in emotionality should not always be the servant of cool rationality. There are situations where it should be its equal or be given its head. And thus we become sometimes more truly ourselves, and by the same token, in the broad sense of capital that includes love, listening and responding with generosity, catching our soul. Thank you.